Well, I feel honored to be officially a Little Creeker now. That's a really good thing. In a little over a year that I've been retired, I think I've probably been here to church more than about anywhere else. And a lot of times when my wife and I have a weekend off and don't have anything to do, we come here anyway. So that's kind of nice. My wife is in Oregon today. She now that her mom's getting older, mom's 86, she tries to go out and help her about once a quarter. And mom uses a walker to get around, and she can't get down on her knees and scrub showers and stuff like she used to. So my wife kind of goes and takes care of some of those projects for her and goes through the cabinet. I remember one time I went through her cabinet and was looking for some crackers for my soup, and I opened up, this box was there in the cupboard, and I opened them up and put them in my soup, and they were stale as could be. I think they'd been sitting there probably 3 years or something, you know. They'll buy groceries and eat it maybe one time, and then they won't eat it again for a long time. So my wife had to kind of go through and sort of throw that stuff away, you know, get rid of it. And that's where she is, but she'll be back with us next week. And this is kind of a first for me too, because I get to talk to you 2 weeks in a row. And so we're going to take a look today at starting. And we're focusing this week and next week on what it means to be part of God's family and what good news that is. And there's a great text that we've just read that is kind of anchoring our series, and I would like for you to look at it again, and I want us to read it out loud together. Don't be shy, just go ahead and read it out, because these are really great words. Here's what the psalmist said. Read it out loud. Since my youth, O God, you have taught me, and to this day I declare your marvelous deeds. Even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, my God, until I declare your power to the next generation, your mighty acts to all who are to come. All right? Fabulous words. And what I want to point out here, that the psalmist says that even though I'm old and gray, not forsake me. But you will notice that his concern is not for himself. What is his concern? He says, don't forsake me until I declare who you are, your greatness, the wonder of your ways, to the next generation that is growing up in a world that needs you so much. His concern is for the generation behind them. And I have to say that part of why this text resonates so much with me is that I'm a dad. I am a dad. There is nothing that matters more to me than to have my children come to know and love God and honor Him as long as they live on this earth and one day spend eternity with Him. I don't care. There's nothing else in this world that matters more to me than that. All right? So today's message, what we're going to do is we're going to look at this whole area of starting strong in life. And the goal of this message is to help us to understand the challenges that are faced in the generation that's growing up today, in today's world. And for all of us, whether we're young or old, it doesn't matter. I want us to own the task of passing the faith on to the next generation, whatever it takes. Okay? I'm going to do that by just kind of orienting this talk around 3 observations. 3 observations. The first observation is really pretty obvious, but it's surprising how many people, even how many churches, can forget this. And the first observation is this. It is up to the older generation to figure out how to hand the faith to the younger generation. Okay? That's mine and your job. It is up to us who have been around a while to own that burden, that task, of passing on our Christianity, our relationship with Jesus, to the next one. Now, of course, we do this partly because God just kind of hardwired that into us. That's just kind of the way the human species is. We want to protect the next generation. When I was a kid growing up, our cars were a lot different than they are today. No padded dash, bench seat in the front, no seat belts. And so when I would ride with my dad, right beside my dad. And so when my dad would stomp on the brake real hard, he would throw his arm out, right? To try to stop me, to keep me from going through the windshield. Even today, when I ride with my dad, he's 88 years old. He weighs 50 pounds less than me. When he hits the brake hard, he throws his arm out. Not that it's going to do any good. It's just that it is hardwired into his being to look after his kids. All right? Now, this is important. Through the ages, what it takes to pass the spiritual life and faith to the next generation varies enormously. Okay? The ways of one generation, God does different things with different generations as they come along. And we need to understand that. For instance, okay, in Moses' day, well, I won't go there quite yet. Moses' day, God actually had them write the law on their doorposts and the doors of their house. Okay? And on the gates of their house. We'll look at that a little bit later on. Then in Joshua's day, just one generation later, God does a new thing. God is always doing new things with new generations. He has Israel cross the Jordan River into the promised land, and they're kind of anxious. They've been 40 years waiting to do this, and they're kind of anxious to get on with it. But God says, hold it. Wait a minute. Before you get on with your life, I need you to stop and to think about the generation that is to come. And he has them take 12 boulders out of the middle of that Jordan bed and stack them up. Okay? And then God says to them, in the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground, for the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. God says, I want you to interrupt your lives. I want you to own the agenda that it's up to you to pass your faith on to your children, because you're going to be the ones to tell them. Go forward a few centuries. The Dark Ages. The Dark Ages, the way they passed on the faith to their children was through a catechism. They had what was called the Heidelberg Catechism. And for you, those of you that don't have a Catholic background or a particularly mainline Protestant background, a catechism is basically questions and answers. The teacher will ask questions and the children will learn to memorize the answers. And the Heidelberg Catechism is the one they used in it. And folks, it is beautiful. For instance, here's the very first question in the Heidelberg Catechism. What is your only comfort in life and death? What is your only comfort in life and death? And the answer is this: that I am not my own, that I belong, body and soul, in life and in death, to my faithful Savior, Jesus Christ. Isn't that beautiful? Absolutely wonderful words. Children would learn that answer. What is my only comfort in life and death? And the kids say, yeah, my only comfort in life and death is that I don't belong to me. I belong to my faithful Jesus Christ. Fabulous words. In the Middle Ages, they used stained glass windows. windows. They would build these big cathedrals, and there would be these stained glass windows in these churches. And because children were basically illiterate, they could walk into church and they could look at these beautiful stained glass windows, and lots of times they told a Bible story or featured Bible characters. Now, this didn't happen back in the Middle Ages. It happened a little more recently, but in Evanston, Illinois, they have the Presbyterian Church there, First Presbyterian Church there, has a series of beautiful stained glass windows. And one day the senior pastor, he calls all the children up to the front, and he tells them a children's story like we do. And so he points to one of the stained glass windows and he says, "Children, who is that man holding 2 tables of stone?" And a little girl about 7 years old, she says, "Oh, that's Moses." And the pastor says, "That's wonderful. How did you know that?" And the little girl says, "Well, right at the bottom of the picture, it says Moses." The pastor, all the years he'd served there, had not noticed that before, okay? Yeah. But stained glass windows were used to pass the truth on to the next generation. When I was growing up, we had a brand new technology. It was called the flannel graph. Anybody remember the flannel graph? Yeah, you came to Sabbath school and children's department, and they had this flannel board, and they would tell the story using these little flannel characters that they would put on the flannel board. That was state of the art in my day. Okay. Well, the methods change from one age to another, but the burden, the passion to get it done must remain constant. And sometimes that gets lost in churches. Sometimes one generation will just kind of focus on themselves and the stuff that they like. And they'll forget that there's another generation coming along that needs to own the gospel. And the way they are going to learn it is different than the way you and I learned it. I had a church member one time. She was a wonderful, wonderful lady. In fact, I will tell you, I would gladly have her as a church member in any church I ever pastored. But the lady had one flaw. I'm glad it was just one. One flaw. And that was, her weakness was that she thought that the way you reached young people was the way that she was reached in the 1940s and 50s. Okay? But listen, the children of today did not want to sing the songs that she loved growing up. The children of today did not want to come to a church social where they march. Anybody remember marching in the Adventist church? You know, we didn't believe in dancing, and so we would go to the gym and we would do these marches back and forth, okay? If you ever watched the old John Wayne movie, Fort Apache, they have a march for their NCO social, you know. And she just thought, that's the way you do it, and if you don't raise the young people that way, you're doing it wrong. Fortunately, when the youth director presented his program, you know, she tried to get him to change it to that, and fortunately our church board voted her down. It would have been a disaster, okay? So let me ask you, how committed are we to passing on the faith to those who come after us? What price will we pay? What sacrifice will we make so that they can know? You see, truth doesn't change, but the methods of installing that truth changes. And churches oftentimes don't understand the difference. My son Michael, about 10 years ago, he was 20, and he came to me and he said, "Dad, I want you to listen to a Christian song, and I think it's just wonderful, and I believe you will like it too." And so I went in and he put on this song. I will tell you honestly, it was not my music. It was some kind of Christian rock thing, and all I could hear was this heavy beat, and I couldn't understand a word the singers were saying. Okay? Now, when the song was over, this is a telling moment with my son. And so I say to him, Mikey, what is it about that song that you liked? And my son quoted me 2 lines from the song that were absolutely gorgeous thought. And he says, whenever I hear that song, it makes me feel so close to Jesus. Amen. Now, what do I do as a dad? Do I say, man, that's a devil's music. You shouldn't listen to that. You are deceived. Or do I remember that God's way of dealing with the next generation is not my way? And so what I said to him was, son, anything that brings you close to Jesus, I am for. You see, it doesn't have to be my way. God has ways of reaching people that are not my ways. And that's true of the next generation. Which leads me to the second observation. Growing up, receiving the faith, living godly lives is not getting easier for the growing generation. You know, sometimes it's tempting for our generation to feel like that we kind of had it hard and rough and tough, and the new generation, man, they've got it easy. Okay? There's an elementary school at the edge of my neighborhood, and I have noticed that kids don't walk to school anymore. Every day outside this elementary school at 8 o'clock, there's what I call the dance of the minivans. Okay? And it reminds me of my day growing up here in the South. School was 5 miles away, and we walked to school, 100-degree heat, 100% humidity, uphill both ways. Right? That was just it, baby. That was the world that I grew up in. But it occurs to me that the reason why children don't walk to school anymore is that mom and dad are convinced that it's no longer safe for children to walk. The kids today are growing up in a different world than I grew up in, where I could walk or ride my bicycle anywhere I wanted to go. And so I want to talk a little bit more about the world that the emerging generation is growing up in, because we need to understand and own this. And a lot of this is based on research that is current, that's out there, and it talks about the generation that my grandchildren are growing up in. Okay? And here's the findings about the modern family in America. Number one, they are overscheduled. When I started out in ministry, I used to go visit any family, any afternoon, any evening I wanted to after 6, and they were home. Today, if I don't have an appointment, the shut-ins aren't even home. Okay? People are overscheduled. They feel there is a lack of time. There is a lack of time for reflection. There is a lack of quiet. There's noise and stuff going on all the time. There is a lack of space. Too much hurry. And I'd say more about that, but we don't have time. Too much hurry. All right? Too much commitment. Too much pressure to succeed. All right? To succeed. That's the American family. Denise Clark Pope has written a really interesting book called Doing School: How We Are Creating a Generation of Stressed Out, Materialistic, Miseducated Students. And we've decided to find success largely in our society in terms of compulsive achievement. And kids feel the weight of this compulsive achievement. They have to be on the traveling squad of their athletic team. They have to excel at their hobbies. They have to get good grades. They have to get into a good college. They have to get a good job. And they live with this to such an extent that I read this article here just recently. This involves people around us, folks. University of North Carolina, just down the road. 50% of freshman women are on medication for anxiety and depression. Okay? Right here in Raleigh. Chapel Hill, okay? Yeah, 50% of the freshman women are on medication for anxiety and depression. That's the world we live in, folks. That's the burden they carry. Another thing, adolescence is beginning earlier and lasting longer than ever before in the history of the human race. And I want to pause and talk about that a little bit. Show of hands on this one. How many of you have gone through puberty? All right, how many of you gone through it? Okay. How many of you loved it so much you're just dying to do it again? Well, I want you to know that it is starting earlier than ever before. Few words on this one. From a purely physiological point of view, because of advances in medicine and health care and diet and so on, literally, physiologically, the onset of puberty is beginning years ahead of where it was 150 years ago in the middle of the 19th century. Okay? A man named Christian Smith, well, not there quite yet. Not just kids. But with the onset of puberty, these kids are making life-impacting decisions about real serious stuff, about sexuality, about alcohol, the abuse of drugs, making decisions not just in high school, where they used to make them. Now, they are making them in middle school. They're having to make significant decisions significantly earlier than when you and I were growing up. My dad gave me the talk when I went off to academy, to high school. Today, if you're not giving your kids the talk, by the 5th grade, you're way too late. All right? And through television and through movies and through the internet and the e-world, kids are being relentlessly bombarded by the popular culture's idea of success, performance, appearance, belonging, the good life in a more pervasive way, a more invasive way than I ever experienced when I was growing up. And they need an alternative culture to help them make these decisions. And that's part of what Jesus was doing when he began his church family. We are to be a redemptive community that can provide alternative culture, living in an alternative way of life that can be a blessing to the world where the culture gets so messed up apart from God. So adolescence is beginning earlier and lasting longer than ever before. And a little bit on this. 60 years ago, 1959, the average marital age for a man was 22. For a woman, it was 20. My parents got married in 1950, and they were 19 and 18. Okay? 59, no. 22 and 20. Within a few years of graduating high school, it was expected that you would get married, that you would have a job that you would keep the rest of your life, and you would begin to have children. Today, the whole era, there is a new stage of life. There is a whole new stage that goes from 18 to 30. And it's now called emerging adulthood. Emerging adulthood. A guy named Christian Smith, we're back to where I was. Christian Smith, a sociologist from Notre Dame University, may be the leading expert on spirituality and students and young people in our day. And he noted, along with a lot of other folks, that due to a variety of reasons, the complexity, the challenge of entering into adulthood is higher than ever before. It takes longer. Education takes longer. Finding a career is much more complex than it ever has. Financial pressures are heavier. Marriage happens later, if at all. And spiritual journeys are more complex, so that we see, according to the experts, the development of this whole new stage of life called emerging adulthood. So let me show you how things have changed, okay? In Jesus' day, there were two stages of life. You were a child from 1 to 12, and then you were an adult. Which is the reason, if you've ever been to a Jewish bar mitzvah that they hold for boys, they do it at what age? 12. Because that's supposedly when a Jewish boy becomes a man. Okay? They still do it that way. But that was Jesus' day. By the time of the Industrial Revolution, they had added another stage. Childhood went from 1 to 12. Adolescence is the new stage. It lasted from 13 to 17, and then from 18 on, you were considered an adult. And that's the reason we have drinking ages and driver's license, lots of different things that sort of, you're considered in your majority after 18 in a lot of places. Get drafted at 18, all those kinds of things. That's the world that my parents and basically I grew up in. That's what was expected of us. Now, from a spiritual point of view, it gives us a whole new challenge. Okay? Research indicates, and once again, there's lots and lots of studies on this, that somewhere, let's get back to this. I got ahead of myself again. Stages of life today. You're a child from 1 to 9. Adolescence is from 10 to 17. Emerging adulthood, 18 to 30, and you're an adult at 30 plus. Okay? That's the way life is today. You can't, and I hear parents all the time say, well, man, I wish my kids would leave home. They're still here and they're 30 years old. Yeah, they're emerging adults. Okay? Now, the reason this has spiritual implications for us is that for this emerging adults, 65 to 90% will drop out of church during those years. So you look around at kids in that age group, and they're not here. They've dropped out. The average Seventh-day Adventist today is 60 years old. I want you to know I'm not satisfied with that. Are you? And part of that means we need to start rethinking ministering to children and to students, not in terms of just getting them up to 18 and then they're on their own. Now we've got to figure out a way to get them to 30 with a strong commitment to Jesus Christ and to the church. Now, it used to be that this tendency to not be involved in church was kind of normal. Lots and lots of kids would kind of drop out of school after 18 because they're trying to get their career going, they're trying to get their marriage taken care of. But then they have children and they would come back. Okay? Because when you have children, you'll sign up for about anything that offers you some support and wisdom, anything at all. So we would lose them, but we'd say, well, they'll be back when they have kids. Let's talk about the gap. 50 years ago, the gap between leaving church and coming back when you have kids might have been 5 years. Okay? Kind of leave out 18 and kind of get career, get married, and then they have kids and they're back. Today, the gap ranges from 10 to 15 to 20 years. And folks, if they have been out for 20 years, guess what? They're not coming back. They're not coming back. The church 50 years ago just used to kind of punt the children leaving. They said, oh, they'll be back in a few years when they have kids. We can't do that anymore. We can't. It is spiritual suicide for our kids and for us as a church. Okay? Not only that, but young people who are raised in the faith are living in a generation that is increasingly skeptical, suspicious, even negative towards Christianity. And there's a lot of research on this one. And I'll quote one book. It's a book called Unchristian. It's put out by the Barna Group. And they have defined 6 main themes that young people, this emerging generation, outside the church, 6 themes that they feel when they hear the word Christian, why they think Christians are. Here's the way young people outside the church look at Christianity. We are hypercritical. Okay? We are judgmental. We are anti-homosexual. We are insensitive proselytizers, and I want to go back to that one right here. That really hits Christianity because Christianity believes that Jesus is the only way to heaven. And so if you're a Buddhist, we want to convert you, right? And the world looks at that and says, well, you're all sure elitist. And it gets worse when you talk about Seventh-day Adventists because we believe not only are we Christians, we are God's last day remnant church. And they say, how arrogant can you be? It's the way they look at it. We're out of touch with reality. We say, don't have sex till you're married. And they say, that used to be 3 years after I graduated high school. Now I'm past 30. I'm not waiting that long. My hormones are moving. Okay? Political in ways that are unthinking. They look at Christian preachers, the Jerry Falwells and so forth, and they say, they back causes that are totally anti-Christian. They back their candidate, if it was Adolf Hitler. That's the way they look at it. Now, this research has caused a lot of debate within Christianity. Because those of us inside the church, we look at that and we say, okay, how much of those attitudes are there because we have earned them as Christians? Or how much of those attitudes are there because that's what society teaches these young people about Christianity? Or how much of those attitudes are there because children, young people, have looked at the gospel and rejected its claims? And the answer is probably some of all 3 of those. Okay? What is clear is that young people are growing up in a society where skepticism and negativity about the Christian faith have reached levels that I never had to deal with when I was that age. Okay? And what is clear is that to follow Jesus today requires on the part of an emerging adult a level of courage and nonconformity that was just never required of me. And so I want to say to anybody that's here today who is 30 and under, you're my hero. You're my heroes. You are my hope. We honor you for your courage and your faithfulness. We cheer you on, and as a church, we are committed to being a community that will love you and give you support and encouragement in your generation. Now, we also want to take a look at the church, because another important question is, what do we do to equip the emerging adults? What do we do? First, we need to be answering the questions that this emerging generation has today. And too often, we are not. For example, just as an example here, folks, teaching or preaching a sermon on the state of the dead is not particularly interesting to the emerging generation. Not because it is not true or not correct, but because to that age group, death, they think, is a long, long, long way off. They've got more pressing concerns. I'm not saying never preach a topic on the state of the dead. I'm just saying we need to be addressing their concerns. And maybe the fact that they're not sitting here this morning says we've not done a very good job of that. Okay? Young families today are asking questions like, how do we hold our marriage together? How do we handle the financial pressures, the mortgages, the school loans? How do we handle raising our kids in this world? How do you live with exhaustion and overscheduling? Our church programs for that group need to be centered around answering and showing those kinds, talking about those kinds of issues. And guess what, folks? We have answers to that. I've told you already, the average Adventist is 60. That means we've lived through that. We know something about it. We can give them some good counsel. We've got it here, just with our experience of life. And when we do that, when we make that the center of our focus, the word will go out. There is a place called Little Creek where young families can come. Married parents, single parents, it doesn't matter. You can come and you can find wisdom here. And those of us that are older and more experienced, we know how to deal with those pressures. The older folks here, we can provide answers, not in an authoritarian way, but in a mentoring way to our young people. In fact, Psalms tells us this: one generation will commend your work to another. They will tell of your mighty acts. They will speak of the glorious splendor of your majesty. Another thing young people need, this emerging generation, they need a place at the table. One of the most successful churches in all of Charlotte right now, fastest growing church, is pastored by a guy named James White. Okay? He's not an Adventist, but James White. And his church, he's got several thousand members. His church is nearly all emerging generation. And you know how he got them there? One of the things he did was saying, we are going to do things and have programs that are designed around that generation. And in fact, he doesn't allow anyone on the church board who is past their 31st birthday. And he does that to make sure that the church does programs that are meaningful for that age group. Okay? Young people want to be a part, and we have to give them a place at the table. On top of that, young people look at mine and your generation, the baby boomers, and they say, you know what? You all talk a good talk, but you don't do nothing. They don't want to come and just sit at church. They hear us talk about how we should be concerned about the poor and the homeless. They don't want to talk about it. They want to do it. My kids live in Chattanooga, and the church that they go to, Adventist church that they go to, is very involved in the community. After church, every Sabbath, they open up their doors to the homeless, and the homeless come streaming in there and they eat. During the week, they have showers in their church, and they open it up, and the homeless can come in and take a shower. During the week, they will go out with the police, and they will hand out blankets to the homeless. You see, that generation doesn't want to just talk about it. They want to do it. You and I, we're older, we're tired. You know, we don't want to do that. I brought it up to my church in Fayetteville. We don't want to do that. We're tired. We don't have time. The young people, they have time and energy. They want to do it. So it don't matter. You don't have to do it. Just make it available so they can do it. And the word will go out. There is a place. They actually do what they talk about. Which leads me to the third. Once these programs are in place, there is a very good sentence that you should know and use regularly. Every one of us can use this sentence regardless of our age, our education, our social status, our race, or ethnicity. All right? Do you know what that sentence is? Here it is. You should come to our church. Whenever you're talking to people outside the church that you meet in your daily life, and they tell you about some level of concern that they have, your response should be, you should come to our church. We deal with that. We talk about that on a weekly basis. You should come to our church. Now, just to help you, I have you do this just to help it resonate with you. Say that with me. You should come to our church. Was that hard? No. That's easy. Anybody can do it. I told you. Just say, hey, you should come to our church. We should do that. That's right here. That's the dream. You can do that. God has given us resources and gifts, and He will lead us in it. And we've got a lot to learn. We don't know it all yet, but we can do it. One more observation. The starting place for all of this is prayer. It's a prayer deal. It really is. I want to say a word here to family members, especially to parents. Especially to parents. It's kind of a challenging word, I'm going to admit. There is a tendency these days to outsource a large chunk of what parents have historically done. We outsource it to professionals now. And that's not altogether a bad thing. In previous centuries, generally, whenever kids were going to learn, they would learn from their parents. And nowadays, mostly, we send kids somewhere else to learn things we want them to learn. And once again, that's not totally bad. You know, if we want them to get an education, we send them to school to professional teachers. If they want to learn to play a musical instrument, we send them to a music teacher who teaches them music. If we want them to do better scholastically, we hire a tutor to help them out. If we want them to excel in sports, we hire a coach to train them. If they have problems, we send them to a counselor. And lots of parents historically, nowadays have actually turned the process of raising their children over to professionals. Now, again, that's not mostly a bad thing, A lot of good stuff is involved in that, but as parents, we need to think about this quite seriously. The problem is that spiritually, that's not God's plan. Okay? We think sometimes, well, I could just take the kids to church. I'll drop them off at the church and let the church teach them, and then I'll come pick them up at the end of the day. That's not God's plan for getting strong. The central text in all of Judaism was called the Shema. It comes from the very first word in Hebrew, which means, "Hear, O Israel." Okay? This is how people were to be formed in godly ways, and here was God's plan. Here's the text, and I've changed the words just slightly so you can see where I get off track. Here we go. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength. These commands that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Hire professional faith instructors to teach them to your children. Have volunteers and youth rabbis talk to them in clubs. Write the words down for them to hear once a week in synagogue. Yea, verily I tell you, outsource the spiritual education of your children." Is that what the Scripture says? No, it's not. Here's what it says. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commands that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk to them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates." In other words, you cannot outsource the spiritual life of your children. It's your deal. The ball is in your court. And I want to anticipate at this point that I know what some of you parents will say. You'll say, "I'm not competent. I'm not adequate. Too many things I don't know. There's too many questions that I cannot answer. There's too much Bible that I don't understand. My own spiritual life is too underdeveloped." And to tell you the truth, talking to my kids about spiritual things, kind of awkward. Makes me feel uncomfortable. Well, let me give you the best theological response I can give you. Duh. Who doesn't feel incompetent talking to their kids about important things? I've stood up front and I have talked about faith and God most of my adult life. But not a week goes by that I don't think, I don't know enough. I'm not clear enough communicator. I don't believe enough. I am not good enough. I talk a much better game than I actually live. And it's not funny, but I'll tell you something. Waiting for someone fully competent to proclaim God to the next generation is like waiting for the Cleveland Browns to win the Super Bowl. Nobody knows your children like you. Nobody monitors your children like you. Nobody loves your children like you. And the reality is that we are shaping their spiritual lives, their beliefs about God and prayer and what matters and what to do with money, whether they're hoarding or spending or relationships or sexuality or justice or concern for the poor. We are teaching our kids that stuff all the time because they are watching us. We are shaping them for better or for worse. So what we want to do is to do a better job as parents. And it's the task of the church to be a support. And what we're increasingly seeing is that it is the job of the church to come along beside parents and families and entire congregations and help this new generation start strong. Now, we have a fabulous Sabbath school. No other denomination has the kind of Sabbath school material that we have for our children. We have adventurers and we have pathfinders. We have a church school that you should be able to take advantage of in those areas. But what we don't have is any programs for the emerging adults. And we need to start working on that to help them learn together about God. And we want to help equip moms and dads and extended family members and friends, the whole community, to raise up a generation that loves and honors and follows God. And we've got to learn about it. A couple of words to parents in particular. Be intentional about your own spiritual growth, because you can't give what you don't have. Begin to regularly read your scripture if you never have. Get into Bible study class if that will help you grow spiritually. Explore membership. If you want them to be a part of a local church, you should be one yourself. So get it done. Next Sabbath, get into a Sabbath school class and talk and pray about the spiritual life of yourself and your kids. Talk to your kids about your own spiritual life, about how you pray, how you know God. Yes, it may feel awkward. It may feel like you don't know it very well, but that's all right. Talk to them about it anyway. Tell your kids about when you accepted Christ. And if you have never accepted Christ, here's a good suggestion. Accept Christ. Okay? You can do that today. And you can tell your kids the story. My son, my daughter, there was a day when I came to understand that Jesus came down from God to earth and He died for my sins. And I have accepted Him as my Savior and I'm following Him. And it's the most important thing in my life. And I know I don't always do it right. I don't always get it right. But I want you to know that more than anything else, more than I want you to be successful, more than I want you to graduate from a good college, more than I want you to be skilled at some occupation, more than I even want you to be healthy, I want Jesus to be your Savior. And then we will all be part of His family. And we will try to finish well, which is next week's topic.